Now, classified documents were found in 3 separate locations connected to President Biden: his former office at the Penn Biden Center in Washington, and then 2 separate spots inside of his Wilmington home, Biden's garage and his personal library. AG Garland now tapping former Trump-appointed federal prosecutor Robert Hur to lead the investigation into the situation. Just yesterday, Garland confirmed to the American people that none of these locations were secure, meaning that documents found were in violation of national security policy and potentially U.S. national security law. But the president insists that the documents found in his locked garage were kept safe. Oh, because that's where he keeps his classic Corvette Stingray. The White House now trying to clean up this colossal mess made by the president while facing mounting pressure to release the visitor logs from his home in Wilmington. Press Secretary Karine Jean-Pierre facing a series of harsh questioning yesterday from reporters. Watch.
What is the White House trying to hide?
Nothing.
When will the White House release a log of visitors to the Wilmington house?
You know, Peter, you've asked this question, or your colleagues have asked this question before. Let's not forget what we did here in this White House. We instituted something that the last administration got rid of, which is putting out the White House, making sure that there was a White House log, extensive White House log.
Why were these classified documents being stored in his garage?
Look, again, and not just me, he has said this. You've heard the president say this twice already, and he's said this before: classified documents and information. He takes that very seriously. I am telling you that I'm not going to get ahead of what the Department of Justice is going to decide. This is something, as you all know, that he will not shy away from saying, and has continued to say this week. And again, he was surprised that these records have been found.
Tomi, it doesn't matter if you take classified document storage seriously. It doesn't matter if you were surprised by their location. What matters is whether or not they were stored at a secure or unsecure location. And as I read in the intro, the Attorney General has confirmed, indeed, every single location was unsecure. Let's see.
Well, I think that his defense has been, well, I love my car, so if I love my car, then I must have loved those documents, and they received a lot of love in my garage. But we all know where we put the things that are not worthy of being in the home. We put them in the garage. And unfortunately, that's where Joe Biden thought that sensitive information should be put, is his garage. But I think more importantly here, we need to look at the timeline. Who knew what when? Because if this was back in November, in early November before the midterms, when they made such a big deal about Donald Trump and the FBI raid and his classified documents, and they had this information on Biden's classified documents, and they didn't report it and they didn't reveal it, that's really problematic, because it really could have changed a midterm season that was very tight, very close, and very focused on Donald Trump. That's the biggest issue I take with all of this, is that timeline.
That's absolutely right. And also, Lawrence, to piggyback on that, you know, there are questions regarding what the Attorney General knew when he was naming a special counsel for the Mar-a-Lago classified document situation with President Trump. He might at that time have full well known about this situation with President Biden. I must as well note that just now during the bilateral summit with the Japanese Prime Minister, there were shouted questions at President Biden. He declined to respond to any of them.
Yeah. It's amazing that the president finally understands that now he's under criminal prosecution, and perhaps he should be quiet right now. Because what we witnessed yesterday, because Peter Doocy was asking the questions, as he do every single day, was a confession from the president. I'm not understanding why there's a debate at this point. The president confessed to having classified material in his garage. We know a garage is not a secure area. This is no longer a debate. There will be criminal prosecution if there is equal justice under the law. That should take place. But I want to comment on some of the things that we've heard from different pundits, different people from on the other side of the aisle. These same people were obviously had so much glee when they went after Donald Trump. They said these are apples to apples. They really aren't. I mean, the former president had the ability to declassify. That is his defense right now. We have a current president who was a vice president at the time. He may have wanted to be president, but he wasn't president at the time. He had no authority to do that. So again, I want to see what the media is going to do on this. The FBI was so willing to leak information the last investigation. Why wasn't there any, media cameras as all of this was playing out? Part of the reason why is because the FBI never conducted a raid. The moment that they figured out that there was as they say, they self-reported to the National Archive, there should have been raids on all of his properties, all of his offices, and that didn't take place. So you got a lot of Americans asking today, why is there one standard for the former president who was actually president at the time, and there's not there's a difference in for Joe Biden?
Yeah, and the Wall Street Journal has, Emily, pointed that out, that this could be two very different investigations in how President Trump's issues were handled versus how President Biden's issues, same issue, going to be handled. But I have to say, I'm curious to see what Merrick Garland's investigation brings. I'm going to wait for that. I do want to see if it's going to be handled, by the book. We shall see. Great men and women that work at the FBI. I know we've talked about the weaponization of the FBI from a political standpoint. But the other side is the media. I have to say, I've been kind of glad to see that the lead story on Good Morning America was these documents, Emily, because we've seen such a, difference of how they treated then President Trump versus how they've treated now President Biden. And I have to say, they are covering this. They are leading with it. They are asking the questions, as you just saw in the briefing room. So I'm kind of happy to see that, to be honest.
Cheryl, I want to ask you a question because you bring up a good point. We are so gleeful that the news is even covering this, which is, by the way, such a low expectation that we have. Well, at least they're covering it. Well, furthermore, I want to say this, and I wonder what Jessica thinks about this as like the lone Democrat on the couch. Do you think that they're ready to throw Joe Biden under the bus because they don't want him to be the nominee in 2024, so they don't care if this looks bad for him? They're eyeing some other potential candidates, probably Gavin Newsom there in California. So maybe this is where it starts. 2 years before 2024, they feel like they kind of got to put up Joe, but if Joe's now implicated in something like this, it's really easy for them to wipe their hands clean and say, we're going for Gavin. That is what I think, as a conspiracy theorist, that's what I think is going to happen here.
That's literally what I said. Yeah, I was like, I'm the conspiracy theorist. And maybe it's Kamala's team. But she's right. Whenever there's a leak, you ask, who does this benefit? And right now, there's a lot of questions being raised as to potentially this benefiting the rest of the establishment Democrat Party that perhaps sees Biden as having outlasted his welcome.
Everybody considered it. Right, where that this showed up now, this started at the beginning of November. How does the timeline work? I think that people who are supporters of President Biden and people who are not supporters of President Biden want a clear timeline. That's how you can piece together this entire puzzle. Merrick Garland has been obsessed with looking impartial. That's something that has even aggravated Democrats, right, who want him to be more partisan, right? You're the Democratic AG, right? Bill Barr was the Republican AG, and he's clearly not doing that. He moved at what seems like warp speed to make sure that there was a special counsel for President Biden, just like there was a special counsel for former President Trump. So I am interested in the timeline because I think it will reveal if any of this was possibly coming from the Democratic establishment. I am not a conspiracy theorist, so I'm not putting that out there as what I think, but
I don't think that they planted it, Jessica. I want to make that clear. I don't think that anybody planted it. I just think it's an easy way for them to say.
Especially since he's supposed to decide or publicly announce,
also,
in the next few weeks.
I wouldn't say warp speed. Jeff Sessions acted way faster than Merrick Garland. It was after the reports were made available to the public that he started to
Tuesday to Thursday is pretty fast, even in news media time, right? That's when we first heard about this story. So,
but allegedly, the National Archives. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
I'm not defending what President Biden did. It is wrong. It's compromising our national security. There are people with lower level jobs who are in jail for less, right? So let's make that clear. The situations still remain very different. So I was rereading what happened when we finally found out about what was going on with former President Trump. And the National Records Office contacted the Trump team 4 months after he left office, so a good year and a half before the Mar-a-Lago raid. And they said, we're missing information. Could you please give it back? Then they went on for months dancing around with them, where they were cooperating at some points, and then they were saying, actually, we're not cooperating. And the final straw was in May when they were set to come to Mar-a-Lago and pick up documents, and they called it off. So, yes, they decided, and Merrick Garland signed off on that warrant, that they had to go in there and get what he should not have had at Mar-a-Lago. We will see where the chips may fall with what happened with President Biden. But this idea now that these two are the same.
Well, they're not the same because one has the ability to declassify information
if we're going
and
back
one
to
doesn't.
The hokey,
and if the Department of Justice truly believe that the president didn't have a merit, that should be litigated. That can be done in the court of law where both parties can present their defense. Instead, they wanted it to create this spectacle, invited the press. How did the press know that they were doing this raid? Why was CNN there in the middle of the night to make sure they got all of this done?
It was in the morning.
Right?
They waited until President Trump was not there. He was in New York attending to
How did the press know?
I actually don't think that the press did know.
They were just waiting there miraculously to catch it all on tape.
I think it is clear that there has been a bias that has been an overlay of the President Trump versus the President Biden situation. 100%.
President Trump also went around saying that they may have planted it themselves, that the FBI, this is a person who has gone over our law enforcement institutions over and over and over again, smacking down about their credibility to the point that this special counsel, the new one, a Trump appointee, isn't good enough for people on the right because he
just like members of the review of the View yesterday were saying that it was planted. Again, we can go both back and forth on both sides saying something again. The problem is we don't have to do that anymore. Joe Biden has admitted to it. We know our garage is not secure. We expect criminal prosecution to go. He doesn't even have a defense at this point.
Right. And I want to make clear some touchstones for viewers, too, before we conclude. There's so much more to cover and discuss, obviously. But so there's national security policy, and then there's national security law. We know absolutely policy was broken. It remains to be seen the results of the investigation, whether we can affirmatively and publicly say that the actual law was broken. We know in this investigation there's civil liability, there's criminal liability, there's many things, but that raises all the questions to the degree of the threat to national security, to the degree of the infringement on national security, which in the politicization of this gets lost because it's the American people, all of us, who suffer equally if China, if anyone had access to these documents that are now being found in the back of badminton sets in a garage next to a bicycle and a car. So the questions remain, what will come up of the Wilmington House log, the visitor log? Who had access to the garage? Why were the documents there? Who had access? That all goes toward the level of piercing national security and that grave threat that it encompasses. But to your point, absolutely policy was broken. We'll see investigatively exactly what law and what will happen moving forward with that, because we can't say that just yet with absolute conclusion.
And also who traced through Mar-a-Lago. Of course, we'll find out from Jack Smith.
Same thing, right? Because we hold every president to the same standard, and this can't become the standard, which is finding a classified document, under the bottom of your shoe in the bathroom. Not okay. Hey everyone, I'm Emily Campagno. Catch me and my co-hosts Harris Faulkner and Kaylee McEnany on Outnumbered every weekday at 12 p.m. Eastern, or set your DVR. Also, don't forget to subscribe to the Fox News YouTube page for daily highlights.